Well, good morning, everybody. I think we're live on the Religion Unplugged Facebook page. Meagan, let me know if I'm wrong about that, and we'll work with the technology. Again, I'm Bobby Ross. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Christian Chronicle and read a weekly column for Religion Unplugged called Weekend Plug-In. That a lot of what we do is highlight some of the top headlines in the world of faith and look at, analyze and fact check stories that are making news in the world of religion. And one of the big stories in the God-beat world of the last week, outside of the inauguration of a new president, was the coverage that, and I always say Bob, how do you say your last name? Smietana?
Smietana.
Smietana. Bob Smietana, national correspondent for Religion News Service, full-time employee there. That will make sense to some people who followed this story a little bit, is here to talk about the coverage he's done of Dave Ramsey, whose name, if you're watching this, is probably familiar to you, a Christian financial guru, radio talk show host, built a $42 million headquarters in Franklin, Tennessee a couple of years ago, just south of Nashville, has, I think, 800 employees, if I remember Bob's story correctly. But we're going to talk about the coverage that Bob has done, and then also talk about the statement that the Ramsey Group released when Bob went to them for comment, because it's, in some ways it's hilarious, and in other ways it seems quite concerning as far as how they handled that statement. Maybe we start with you, Bob, since it was your story. You've done a couple of stories about, that I recall, about Dave Ramsey, one about COVID-19 and then one just about the general culture of that Christian organization. And maybe you could just update people kind of on what that story has been all about and what your investigative reporting has found.
Sure. So I've been here in Nashville since 2008 or so. And actually, I've been trying to interview Dave Ramsey since then. He's a very big presence here. He runs, he's both this national figure who advises people about how to do both people and churches and companies about how to run their finances, and also is a major employer. They've got actually 900 employees, and they're planning to hire 600 more. And they're actually building a $50 million addition to their $40 million building. But they've been concerned for a long time about the culture there. There were concerns early on that they were asking people, that's run pretty much like a church. So that you'd be asked when you went to work, if you wanted to work there, where you went to church, that there's a very strong moral code. So gossip is any negative comment you make about the company is considered gossip. You can be fired for that. There is a kind of allegiance to Dave Ramsey himself. And the concern that their moral code is not applied equally to people. So if you're low down the food chain, you can get fired for anything. If you're higher up, you don't get fired for things. And it's important. It was important to us because Ramsey also runs this thing called EntreLeadership, which is his tools how to manage a company. And so he charges thousands of dollars to have people come in and learn how to run a company Dave Ramsey's way. And they claim to be the best place to work in America. So we vet those claims. It's come under the on the radar a few years ago. They had something called Twittergate, where there were fake Dave Ramsey Twitter accounts where Dave offered bounties to employees to find out who they were and turn them into him so he could talk with them. He pulled a gun at a staff meeting to talk about how much he hated gossip. So that's kind of background. We have been looking a way to talk about what's going on in the culture there. It's very closed-lipped. Anyone who leaves has to sign an NDA, so you can't really, and anyone who works there can't say anything negative or honest because they'd get fired. So it took us a long time to get in there. But basically, we got a break when COVID happened, because when COVID happened, Mr. Ramsey was very, it's a kind of a COVID denier. It's not that bad. We have to don't be afraid of this. If you wear a mask, you're a wuss. And so when they had a couple cases at the company, they shut down for a month, but made everybody come back. And I think that was for employees who had been working at home and perhaps had health concerns themselves or a family member with health concerns, they were uncomfortable with that. So some people got fired, and people were more willing to break with the leadership because they felt like, working in the office and denouncing COVID isn't really our core mission. So we, in January, we reported that they had 100 cases in the building, probably more because they don't have really good numbers, at least what their leadership's told their staff, and that they had a giant 900-person in-person Christmas party at their headquarters, which caused quite a bit of hubbub. And then we just last week we reported on the culture there. So a couple key notes. Someone filed an OSHA report to say that the company was not trying to prevent COVID. Dave Ramsey got up in the middle of a staff meeting. They have a staff meeting every Monday and said, "You're a moron. If I find out who you are, I don't know who you are, but I'm going to find you. If I find out you're fired because you're disloyal to me for reporting anything outside the building," which raises questions about retaliation. They fired there's a woman in the company who went to her boss, asked for maternity leave. She was fired because she's not married, was fired for having premarital sex. We also learned there was an employee whose spouse said something pretty innocuous about not being comfortable with her husband going back to work in the office. She was fired for her husband was hired for the Facebook post. There were some other employees who've had similar experiences. I think one of the big ones is Ramsey's, and I'll stop rambling here, but Ramsey's known for its moral code, and Dave has a very clear, we have a moral code. And one of the big no-nos is adultery. If you have an affair, he says, if your spouse can't trust you, I can't trust you. And people have been fired there for having affairs. Well, one of their major speakers and a high-profile personality has had several affairs, including one with someone at the company, and one that was found out right before he was going on a major book tour in 2018. And when the company found out about that, they decided not to fire him. They offered him marital counseling with the caveat that the counselor and his pastor would report all the details of the counseling to the company's leadership. And his spouse did not go along with that. And then when the couple divorced, they misled I think I've gotten a number of recordings of company meetings, one of them where they talk about his divorce in a lot of detail. Say there's no angels here, throw the spouse under the bus a little bit, but really say there was no, he didn't break there were no clear lines, he didn't break any of our rules. If he had, we're not covering up for him because he's going on book tour. We have integrity and we're going to do whatever we can. So what we found on our reporting is that wasn't the case, that he had broken rules and had lied to the company. We know this because in the divorce filing, he had to file under oath that some things he had done in the marriage, including having several affairs and lying to the company. So, kind of the big tip of this is a company that says it's the best place to work, where Dave has been very clear about, here's are my values, and I want to have a godly company. And we asked one question, does the company live up to its reputation? And secondly, can a company be run like a church? Because this is a church which is organized as a nonprofit, as a for-profit company, so in which has been very lucrative for its owner, but is really operated like a church. You have to believe in the mission. You have to have specific, on the wall they have, we work as unto the Lord, and we have righteous living. And they fire people for breaking religious rules. And there's a lawsuit right now where the person who got fired was pregnant, because pregnancy is a protected class. Having an affair is not protected, but pregnancy is. And so the lawsuit is basically saying that the company discriminates based on religion and sexuality and gender. And so it'll be interesting to see how that all falls out. So, and it's important because, again, Mr. Ramsey spends a lot of time promoting how great his company is and telling other people they should follow his example. So we really asked, we did go to them, and I'll end with this. We went to them, as you do at the end of reporting. We asked for a comment. We sent them some specific questions and our findings. We got a very sarcastic email that said, we're horrible people. We exist just to ruin our spread COVID and do evil to our customers. Made fun of me as being unemployed. I think the thing, they shared my name, email, and asked everyone in their company to contact me. About 100 of them did. And then they sent it to some local pastors, two of them who called me. One was very pleasant, one was not.
Well, I know we want to get into that in more detail. I want to apologize, Bob. I had you start talking and forgot to. I'm a print journalist, not used to this whole broadcast live on the internet thing, and skipped right past the part where the panelists were going to introduce themselves. So if it's not too late, maybe we start with you, Meagan, and kind of go around and everybody just kind of do a brief intro so the people watching this out there know who you are before we get more into the conversation.
Sure. I'm Meagan. I'm the managing editor of Religion Unplugged, where Bobby publishes his weekend plug-in column, and I'm based in New York.
Thanks, Meagan. Cheryl?
I'm Cheryl Bacon. I am the retired chair of the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication at Abilene Christian University. When I was employed there, I taught both journalism and public relations classes, and now I'm a freelancer.
Wonderful. Warren?
My name is Warren Smith, and I'm the president of Ministry Watch. We are also a subscriber to Religion News Service and have published Bob's articles on our site as well, and just want to congratulate him for the excellent journalism there.
Awesome. And Holly?
I'm Holly Meyer. I'm the religion reporter at the Tennessean. Ramsey Solutions would be included in our coverage area. And so I'm glad that Bob was able to get this incredible story put together.
Wow. And I know the Tennessean published Bob's story about Dave Ramsey and the COVID-19. Did you, or have you published the latest story? Do you know? I'm just curious.
We are waiting to find out when they will let us do that, I believe. So.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Bob, you started to get into, and I think we're all very interested in the story itself, but almost maybe even I don't know how to describe it, but in some ways the statement he issued kind of illustrated a lot about what you were trying to say. Just it seemed to me, with just the way that he brushed you off, and you were saying he called you a freelancer, and as if you're not a freelancer, but if you were, there would be nothing wrong with that. But he called you a freelancer and basically, I don't know, degrade is the word, but he kind of, that seemed to be a real big deal. And that the statement that Ramsey Group issued, well, you're a freelancer and you're out there causing trouble. And yes, we're horrible, evil people, which, the surprising thing to me, having reported on Ramsey a few times in my career, is, as I recall, they have several professional public relations people, and I get a Christmas card signed by 10 to 12 of them every year. And this statement, maybe Warren and Cheryl, do you have any kind of, I'm sure you've read the statement, what was your reaction to it, or is your reaction to it?
I actually made the observation that if I were teaching PR principles this semester, we would start with that as an example of how to never, ever, ever do public relations, because it just violated all of the basic principles of ethical public relations, which the best public relations people do operate on a principle of honesty at all times. And I guess that there were ways in which that was honest, but it was certainly counterproductive for the company, and it was vindictive in its treatment of Bob. PRSA Code of Ethics talks about advocacy and loyalty, which it took those two things kind of to an extreme, but also talks about honesty and fairness, which is largely how you treat your readers and the public at large. And it was just completely beyond the pale in that regard.
Warren, did you have it? What did you think of the statement?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with what Cheryl said, that it was beyond the pale, that it was unethical. However, I think we ought to also acknowledge that it might actually be effective for Ramsey's audience, for the people who love him. I mean, unfortunately, we live in an environment today where sort of ideological tribes form around the flag. I mean, they sort of migrate to their hill, to their flag, and we've seen this in the era of Trump that folks will a certain number of people will respond favorably to what Ramsey did. I mean, Bob is the lying news media and fake news, and there will be a certain number of people who will respond to that idea. Now, again, I want to be really clear. I'm not saying that even if it is effective, that the end is justifying the means here. I want to once again end my comment with the way I began it, agreeing with Cheryl that this is completely unethical behavior and should concern those of us who are both citizens and consumers of the news, but also particularly those of us who are Christians who believe that that truth is and should be a real value for us.
I think there's something to be said for him having a certain audience that's going to respond positively to that. I do think that an organization of that size that really relies on a broader audience to sell his product than just what you might call the Ramsey faithful or the Trump faithful. He does have to appeal to consumers. He's not selling MAGA t-shirts. He's selling a service, sells it often through churches. And so I can imagine that the motivation for a response like that was exactly what you're talking about. And I'm sure that they have not done what any other corporation would have done, which is to come out the next day with an apology and a clarification and explaining how the employee was being disciplined. Because we see that happen all the time, especially in social media. You'll see some company come out and say, oh, that was an intern that tweeted that irresponsible thing, and they have been taken off of that account. We haven't seen anything like that. So yes, it will appeal to a certain number of their cult followers, just to put it the way that a lot of people have. But as a corporation, I don't think it's responsible in that their goal is to expand their base and to sell their product and to sell their service. And most of us don't feel comfortable dealing with a company that treats people that way.
And I wondered, as my church is one of thousands that offers Financial Peace University and sends money to Ramsey Group for people to take those Christian financial principles. And I was wondering myself, does my church really want to be associated with somebody who's treating a reporter like this? Is this really the way that a Christian person, responds to someone, even if you disagree with them? That was a question that came to my mind. I'm not the one at my church who would make that decision, but it was a question that did come to my mind. I guess, Bob, do you think an intern wrote that statement, or where do you think that statement came from?
My understanding is that that it came from the top leadership. It sounds a lot like what I've heard Dave Ramsey and other leaders say in meetings. So my understanding is that it did not come from the professional public relations staff, but that it was approved and written by the top leadership. And I'm not exactly sure which one. I think, just a couple things about that. We asked some serious questions about their moral code and the conduct of one of their leaders. They put that, the day the story ran, they put that person as the guest host on the Dave Ramsey show. And they sent us an email. One of the lines in the email that struck me was, we have a recording of this person farting in church, and we'll send that to you. So we asked a serious question about, the conduct of a leader and how it matched with the company's brand and principles. They sent us a kind of a crude joke. But it does reflect the way that the company's leadership treats anyone who disagrees with them. They call them moron, stupid, crazy. It's a kind of, it's Mr. Ramsey will say, and he kind of talks about coming from a hillbilly background. That's the word he uses. So he'll say, you're either for me or you're against me. And that's just the way that they, and there's no, my name's on the building, you do what I say. And so I think that, I don't think it helps I'm not in giving PR advice. I'm not sure it sends, and actually I went back and asked them, are you sure this is the official, I actually asked, is this the official statement? This, because they also asked, the other thing they did in the thing was ask me to come to a worship service they were having that night at the building, which I did. Nobody was social distance, no one wore a mask. So I did wear a mask. I stayed in the back, but it confirmed, this is run like a church. And I said to the host, this, who's very polite, this is different than the email statement you sent me. Is that really a statement you want to say? Well, they said something like, well, that was the point. And I'm not sure what they meant by that, but they have stood behind that statement. We did get a second statement when I finally said, are you disputing anything in the story? They sent me a little more professional statement, but this is what the company wanted to say to us in public. So I think that, it's a multimedia, multi-million-dollar company that deals a lot with churches. And I think this statement does confirm a lot of the things we said about the culture. When you report, you want people to be their best selves and reflect what they are like. And so in this case, this is what they wanted to say to folks.
Bobby, if I could just jump in.
Sure.
I'm sorry, Cheryl. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Go ahead.
Well, Bobby, I just wanted to very briefly comment about something that you said, about your church using Financial Peace University. I do think it's important to note here that while, Dave Ramsey is fond of saying, my name's on the building, you do what I say, as Bob just mentioned, that's something that you will hear from Dave Ramsey from time to time on his radio program and others. I mean, he's large and in charge, and there's no doubt about that. But I don't think we should kind of gloss over the fact that, this, I might, if Bob and I were sitting around and over our favorite beverage, having a long conversation, I might be a friendly contrarian about, is it being run like a church, and is that appropriate or not? Because I do happen to believe in private property and free enterprise, and that vocation, that there's no distinction between the sacred and the secular. And if somebody wants to run their company according to Christian principles, I don't necessarily think that is a bad thing. However, I would also say that this money is not strictly a free enterprise operation. I mean, they have these relationships with churches that take donor money. I mean, this money comes in the front door of churches, supposedly for ministry, and then goes out the back door to Dave Ramsey in the millions and even tens of millions of dollars. So that relationship, Dave Ramsey's touting of entrepreneurship in the free enterprise system is a bit disingenuous, because a lot of that money that has built his company has in fact come from donors who sometimes give sacrificially to their churches, and see some of that money go out the back door to Ramsey.
Yeah, the thing I was going to say about your church and a lot of other churches is, no, I don't expect a lot of churches to suddenly cancel their relationships with Bob Ramsey because of that email. I mean, it's sad but true that a lot of them don't care or won't have paid attention. But I do think that there is a long-term effect of that kind of behavior that can have a negative impact. That is not to say that there are not a lot of badly behaving CEOs in the country. But sometimes that backfires on them. And so Papa John's is no longer run by Papa John. And there are other, if even the NFL will end its relationship with its top executives over bad behavior, then at some point you think this could have a long-term impact. I think he's going to, be able to count his money and do just fine forever. But even if he didn't, it was unwise, and it was unethical, and it was not Christian behavior in any way, shape, or form. I mean, if we move away from what was the public relations behavior involved, it was simply unkind and untrue, and therefore not consistent with the kinds of principles that he says he maintains.
If I can add one thing, I think on what Warren said about the running a company by Christian principles. Actually, that's one reason what the story made sense to us to pursue, because there is a bigger question here: is how much can a for-profit religious company require an owner at a for-profit religious company? What can they require their employees to do? Can they require their employees to be religious? Can they require a code of conduct? Because lots of places have code of conduct that ban certain things you can and can't do. The question here, and post Hobby Lobby, there are some questions about this, and I think the lawsuit here in Nashville may end up answering some of those questions or be a first step to answering that. I think, because a for-profit company is not exempt from Title IX in the way a nonprofit church is. And so, because the nonprofit, one reason is that the nonprofit serves the mission, so it doesn't benefit a single person. In this case, the company wants to have the benefits of operating as a religious organization, and while still maintaining the financial benefits of operating as a for-profit company. And whether you can, if you're a church, even churches though, I did have this interesting talk with a lawyer who represents a lot of churches, saying that pregnancy even for churches is difficult because pregnancy is a protected class for discrimination. And so you fire a pregnant person, unless they're like a clergy, you can get, if you call it prior secretary or administrative assistant, which this person was, for being pregnant, you can get in trouble. You can be sued and lose. So I think will help us determine some boundaries. So this is a bigger question. So both the influence of Ramsey and these bigger questions of, how much can a company require its people to practice a certain religion, were sort of the driving forces in the story.
Holly, Meagan, I'm wondering if you, as religion journalist, kind of whether you have any thoughts based on what you've heard so far in this discussion, or even kind of what went through your mind as you read the statement that the Ramsey group sent to Bob and included his, I copied the email to the entire company and to pastors, and basically said, here's Bob's email, here's his phone number, here's where he lives. Go tell him what you think about him, basically. I'm wondering, is that normal for a source to respond that way, or how do you react to what happened?
I can go.
Thanks,
I
Holly.
think that's a pretty unusual statement to get. It's not unusual to get people mad at you, or to get pushback, or a decline to comment, or what have you, or even escalate it to people above me as a reporter, to my editors, and even higher than that. So that was really unusual. I think in the climate today, where we have all of this anti-media animus, it is always really concerning to me when anyone takes all of their supporters and directs them towards reporters in sort of a negative way, because we don't necessarily know, like, can that get out of hand? And we've certainly seen a rise in this anti-media idea. We saw it play out at the US Capitol. We know that members of the media were targets of rioters. We saw, I believe the phrase was "murder the media," scratched onto the window or the door of the Capitol. And so that is always something that's really makes me really wary to direct a group of people in that direction. I had a similar experience recently. I wrote a story. The pastor didn't like it. He preached about it and me, and called me a liar from his pulpit on Sundays, a couple Sundays ago. And instead of reaching out to me directly, or my organization, he asked his congregation to reach out to me. So I received 15 to 20 emails. Generally, the tone was that I should be ashamed, I'm a liar. At the end of the day, my company stands behind me, and then we stand behind that story. But it was just that moment of being like, okay, where is this going to go? Because you see story after story of journalists receiving that level of harassment. So that's just like something in the climate today that really stands out to me, and that I've been at this for about a decade, and it's definitely over the last like the last half of that I've been more aware that can be a response.
To me, Bob's story made me think about a couple of things. One, more from the journalist side, is why are some people more prone to not like journalists? And it feels like this evangelical culture, there's a part of it that is like that. And it reminded me of the worship pastor, Sean Foyt, who became really popular this summer and didn't want to talk to me, even though I know, one of his very closest friends, and we're friendly together, and I had his number and everything, but he didn't want to talk to us. But he also frequently posts about the media lying. And then it also reminded me of, just from the not journalist side, but like participant in some of the evangelical culture, of the stories like Ravi Zacharias, of these big titans who then like fail. And even though a lot of people have been positively impacted by their work, and with Ramsey gotten out of debt and, learned financial literacy, which is actually a really big problem for a lot of people, and, contributing to some even bigger societal problems that people have, like unequal access to financial literacy. But then, and yet he disappoints people in these like big ways. And for some people, it's really shocking.
Appreciate that, Megan. For some reason, I think your screen is frozen. I don't know why.
I know. I don't know why my video is frozen. Sorry, guys.
Oh, that's okay. There was a little yellow or on mine around it, so I knew who was.
I'm smiling,
talking.
but my frozen self is not happy.
Wow.
I would say one thing. Holly was very nice not to say that the church that did this was the governor's church here in Tennessee,
Wow.
and a very large. It's actually a church. One of the judges used to go there. It's very kind of well known and powerful congregation. So it wasn't just any megachurch pastor would probably doing that would be concerning, but this was the church where the governor goes to church.
Wow. And this is not directly, I guess, related to the topic of this panel, but when did Christians and church people bullying reporters, when did that become a Christian thing to do?
Well, Bobby, you're right. This is kind of beyond the scope of what we're talking about, but I would just mention that it's not necessarily a new thing. I mean, we sometimes have a short memory about these kinds of things. Journalism done right is always speaking truth to power, and power does not like to be, sometimes doesn't like to have truth spoken to it. Marvin Olasky wrote a book about 30 years ago called Prodigal Press, and I helped Marvin revise that book 7 or 8 years ago. And the first 2 or 3 chapters of that book really highlight a couple of kind of important moments in American history that put media on one side and evangelicalism or fundamentalism on the other side. One of them is the 1925 Scopes monkey trial. You had, H.L. Mencken, probably the leading journalist in the country at that time, on sort of one side of that, and fundamentalism on the other side. You had the Whittaker Chambers Alger Hiss trial, which was around 1950, that once again kind of pitted the liberal, the so-called liberal media establishment of Washington, D.C. and New York against, against someone like a Whittaker Chambers, who was a flawed but credible witness to many folks in the religious world. And so there are, this has been a long time coming, I guess is what I'm trying to say. This is not necessarily a new thing that that Christians don't like journalism, don't like journalists. And I would also add that social media, since about 2007, we really have had a sort of a technological revolution since about 2007 and the advent of the smartphone and Facebook and that sort of thing. It's that has been an accelerant that has been thrown on the fire. But I think the fire has always kind of been, in the fireplace for a while, maybe even for generations. It's just now with social media, it's kind of escaped the fireplace and is starting to burn the house down, if I may abuse a metaphor there.
Uh-huh.
What made me laugh about your question is the one time where I was threatened, where I felt a bit concerned, was in a church. It was at a big anti-Muslim conference where I had written about some of the leaders, and one of them called me out from the stage. Is he here? You should know it. And the person in front of me got in my face and threatened me. Now, the irony is this big mega church was run by an ex-con pastor who for some reason really liked me. And I just said, well, I don't think Pastor Morey, let's just go talk to Pastor Morey and see what he thinks about this. And so he was like, no, you're not threatening my guests. But, you know, they from the stage, a very angry crowd yelled at me. This, you know, Dave Ramsey doing this was not as threatening, but I know it could go bad. And, you know, this reminds me a little bit of the response of Bill Hybels to the Chicago Tribune reporting on his misconduct, where he got up and the church whole machinery. So the church with a lot of machinery. So Ramsey, for example, he's a giant media outlet, has a large reach. They have a great megaphone. And so to have that turn on you could go wrong. And for the Chicago Tribune, for example, they got up in the church and told all the people these are liars, and they never happened. And of course, it turned out much of that what their reporting was true and was vindicated. I think this is an ongoing issue. We've had two things going on. We've had some high-profile evangelical leaders in particular who are celebrities crash and burn, you know, or do things they shouldn't do, and when asked, denied it or hide it or you know, attack the people who raise those questions. And then we kind of found out it's true. We saw that with Ravi Zacharias, Bill Hybels, we saw a little bit with John Ortland, all kinds of folks that are just, the reporter, I've had meetings with religious journalists, editors, some Baptist editors, where I said, just please clean up your own mess. Because the reporters, you know, the people in the church would be better off if folks in the church would see a problem and take care of it. Otherwise, we come in and take care of it, and it's usually much worse at the point where it comes to our attention. And nobody likes to nobody wakes up in the morning and go, gee, I want to go write an expose of this large and important organization on terrible things they're doing or might be doing. But we do it because that's our job, to report the good and the bad. But I think there is a leadership model. There's a new book out called Jesus and John Wayne, which is one of the things it does talk about is the kind of strong man leadership principle in evangelicalism. I think that's one of the things the book gets right, is there is a strong, powerful leadership model that's, you know, a lot of it was influenced by the Bill Hybels corporate leadership model, where the powerful leader who takes no prisoners and grinds people into dust is seen as the example for a Christian leader. So
I will add that sometimes.
We have a few questions from Facebook, so I could read them now, or we could wait.
We got Holly and Warren. I think you each were about to say something, and then maybe Meagan, we go to those questions.
I quickly, sometimes I see this play out in responses I get from readers. The emails usually start with, I clicked on this thinking this story would be terrible and you would not understand what was going on in my particular church or denomination at all. And then pleasantly surprised to find out that you do in fact know what you're talking about. You did talk to the right sources. You did capture what was going on. So I think that kind of speaks to like an anecdotal reaction to your question, Bobby. And so I've just consistently delivered, and so have my peers, good quality reporting, which in a lot of ways, when in this particular instance came to me, some folks who came to my defense were like, why are you going after Holly? Like it's so, but that is one of the things, it's because of my reputation that I've been able to build. What I would love is if we could, you know, sort of waters rise all boats, or whatever the phrase is, that we could bring it all up a little bit more, to not have me treated as this exception, essentially.
If we could somehow figure out how to get people to actually click the link before voicing their opinions, it would be a wonderful place. Warren, were you going to say something?
Well, yeah, I mean, both. I agree with both of you guys. I mean, really, just a quick nuance on what Holly said, and is that I think one of the things I really liked about Bob's story was that even though I do think that to a certain extent we can stand on the justification, hey, that's our job. Our job is to speak truth to power as journalists. I do think also an important part of our job as journalists is to be a voice for the voiceless, to understand that there are victims to these stories. What I loved about Bob's story, one of the many things I liked about Bob's story, was that there are real victims here, and one of them is this woman who was fired, and Bob told her story as part of the telling of the story of Dave Ramsey. And I think that if we understand, if we as journalists understand, that is part of our role as well. It's not merely speaking truth to power, but it is providing a voice for the voiceless and some measure of platform and power for the powerless. I do think that is will not that I'm necessarily care whether we get criticized or not. I just think that in some ways that goes with the job. But I do think that will have, to a certain extent, an impact of deflecting some of that journalism and helping our readers understand that we're just not trying to, poke a finger in the eye of the big dog. We're trying, or poke the big dog, but we're really trying to protect, to help future victims of these, leaders that have gone out of control.
Great. Meagan, we have some questions?
Yeah, I think some of them have been answered. So for example, one was Eric from Christian Chronicle was asking if there's been any response from Ramsey's company. Maybe as a follow-up, we could ask, what's the reader response been like? And have any churches said they're going to drop Financial Peace University materials? And then another question.
And I'm assuming Eric means any response, since they sent that statement and
Yeah.
RNS published it for the world to see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other question that hasn't been answered as much is Paul Dowell's asking, can Ramsey's company discriminate against non-Christian employees? I think Warren and Bob both touched on that a little bit, but maybe you can explain a little more. If they're not actually a church, how does that work?
So that's a really good question. That's actually the question at the heart of, one of the questions at the heart of this story. What the company does now is they do a spousal interview. So if you come to workroom, they have your spouse come in, then they ask, what do you do on the weekend? Which I think folks who have interviewed there think is, that they want to say is go to church. So you can't, so Title IX says you can't discriminate based on religion or on gender or other race and other characteristics, and a religious nonprofit like a church is exempt from those. A for-profit company is not by its nature exempt from those, and so that's the question. So if they were to ask, "Are you a religious person?" Christian person, they would be in violation of Title IX. Now the way the complicating factor is Tennessee, for example, is an at-will state. So you can get fired for anything, but you still cannot discriminate based on race or religion or gender or pregnancy status. So what the company is saying in its response in this case is that she broke a general rule against premarital sex, that the company says you can't have premarital sex. And because she had premarital sex, she got fired, not because it was religious. Now, Mr. Ramsey, in his meetings, he did a meeting where he talked about wanting to have a godly company, and he said, don't come to me and say you love your pastor and I'm living with my boyfriend. It's against the Bible. You're stupid. So his own words have said there's a religious motivation for his rules. So I think that's where the place is that. So there was a case, I don't remember, recently a transgender employee at a funeral home that went to the Supreme Court, and the employee's side, the Supreme Court sided with the employee that being transgender qualified as gender discrimination. Early on in that case, that company had some religious beliefs that they used in the early court cases, but dropped that. So that has not been litigated in court, whether or not so Hobby Lobby said that some closely held religious companies whose owners have religious beliefs have the right to have religious expression in the marketplace. What hasn't been litigated is the other side of that is, as an employee, what are your rights? And can you be required by your secular employer to practice religion in a certain way? We usually see the opposite, where somebody works for a secular company and they have religious beliefs they want to practice. So they need Saturday off, or they want to wear a particular kind of head covering, or need a place and time to pray. Those things we see all the time. The employee's religious practice and asking the employer to allow religious practice. We haven't seen many lawsuits the other way of what if the employer has religious requirements for people. So that's going to be a part of case law. It's a push to have that expanded. But right now, I mean, they are pretty open about the religious motivations for all their conduct policies, and the complicating factors are it's an at-will state, and that a lot of things that a religious person would say don't do are good ethical things. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't harm others. So there's overlap. Does that make sense to folks? It's just kind of it's a really interesting question. I thought it was clear.
Yeah, it does.
And it was. And the legal experts I talked to said there's no clear exemption, but it's still a gray area.
What about the question about, have you heard from Ramsey Group since they issued that statement? Anybody like, oops, that was a joke, we didn't mean that?
No, I haven't heard any of that. I haven't heard that. I think I've heard from folks who have left to say thank you. Other folks who have left to say thank you. Because there are folks under NDAs, they can't talk about it. But I think there are folks who can't talk publicly, but have been thankful about it. I think I will say this: Dave Ramsey's employees, for the most part, were very polite. They sent me these notes. Dave Ramsey and his methods have helped my life. Here's all the great things they did for me. I like this company because my old company was, some of them worked in the music business, some worked at other companies where there was no structure and they felt like there were no rules, and they appreciated the order and structure. I think to almost everyone I've talked to talks about the kind of the ordinary worker culture as being a lot of folks who help each other. So one of the things we report in the story is that when you move here, if you move here out of state, Ramsey employees will help move you in. They'll bring lunch. There's a kind of what they call love bombing almost. But there's a real culture of friendship among employees and helping each other out because they believe in the mission. I think they lose that when they realize that you can lose that quickly because of the ownership. I think, I got a few angry emails, one angry response, one angry pastor who's a friend of Dave Ramsey called me. The folks did prank us. So some folks left my name and number with realtors about houses in Florida and in Tennessee that I wanted to buy. My favorite part, and it did make me laugh, is that I got signed up for a Latter-day Saints singles group. So they paid for this Mormon dating service. They created a fake profile. They linked my email to it of that I was a Mormon woman looking for a husband. And so I got all these messages from, not the direct message, but you have from so-and-so looking for a spouse, and, in my email box. And I think the company first was like, we think this is a fraud. And I'm like, yes. And they refunded the money. And so I got a lot. I've signed up to all kinds of John Maxwell's people called me. All kinds of folks have called me. And Scientologists called me too, because I was reported to Scientologists as needing help and a drug addiction place.
Wow.
Bobby, if I could jump in real quick and just say that we've published all of the stories that Bob has written so far, and we've gotten a fair amount of feedback on those stories as well. It's mostly been positive, but not uniformly positive. And I would just like to reiterate what I've got actually a nephew that works for the Ramsey organization in Nashville, and he loves it. And there is that other side where there is a real community there. There's a real sense of order there. There's an opportunity for, real financial success as well. I've had a number of friends who have interviewed with the Ramsey organizations, and one of the things that they say is that they're not afraid of making a lot of money, and that they hope that their employees make a lot of money as well. I don't know, Bob, you may know more about, how much the employees actually make, whether they are actually, paid on sort of the level of that Ramsey gets paid at for their position. I'm not sure about that. But the one thing I did want to say just real quickly, again, I don't want to go down a rabbit trail too far, but I'm on a little bit of a campaign here at Ministry Watch against non-disclosure agreements. And I think that we have found in our reporting that non-disclosure agreements are almost always used as a tool to hide wrongdoing eventually. I mean, they may not start out that way, but that's usually the way they end up. And so we have been actively encouraging ministry leaders not to use non-disclosure agreements, find another way. If they feel like that they've got some issues or concerns about confidentiality, find another way to solve that problem. And we've strongly advised employees not to sign them as well. I don't know that my one-man campaign is going to end up ending non-disclosure agreements. Somehow I kind of doubt it, but I did want to at least get that oar in the water in this conversation.
That has been, Ramsey does that a lot. They do pay a couple of things. They pay people. So one of the people got fired, got offered $18,000. They were being fired that, they had no insurance, they were going to lose their health insurance. They didn't have any income. They said no, because they didn't want to be bound to it. They didn't want, because I think one other thing that's really interesting about Ramsey that's related to this is the amount of control the company would like over spouses. So if you apply for a job there, your spouse has to come and interview. They have to be 100% on board. And they don't want folks, they call them, you don't want to be married to crazy. So, and there's kind of a constant chatter in the company, I know your spouse is pressuring you to do something else, but we are right. So they want to have control of your relationship with your family, bringing work home and saying, so on one level, they say you should be done by 5. Don't stay late. You can come in early, but don't stay late. We want you to have time with your family. On the other hand, you can't go home and talk to your spouse. And if your spouse says at dinner with a friend something that's perceived as negative towards Ramsey, you can be fired. And they ask you for a budget when they give you an offer. They say, well, before we give you an offer, we're going to offer you this money. You show us your budget. Show us what you need to live on. And their starting wages are generally much lower than the market scale. Now, they do a second thing. They do profit sharing. So if the company's doing well, they give money to bring you up to sort of market level. But it's kind of it's a way for the company, in some ways, if you were cynical, to say they engender loyalty. First they have a pretty intrusive question. You show us your budget, all your income, and then we'll give you an offer. Can you live on our salary? And then second, they'll offer you less than money, but they'll give you profit sharing, so you think they're generous. It's like, who else does this? Who else shares profits? Well, no one else is, because they pay more. So there's kind of a circular. Almost everything the company seems to do, there are a number. Actually, I will say this: there are a number of signs of what the company does in terms of the kind of interviewing they're doing, talking to the spouse, the no gossip policy, to only recruit people who really believe in what they're doing, and to have a lot of control over the spouse and the family, which is kind of unusual, and to set up a situation where you are grateful to the employer for being generous, when if you looked at the generosity and you looked at it, evaluated, am I getting more money than someone in another company who doesn't do profit sharing? You'd say, no, I'm not getting as much money. But I feel that this person is super generous for sharing profits with me that only bring me up to kind of market level. So there's kind of an interesting kind of psychological. I think one of the things I would say to folks, if you go to religionnews.com and read our story, it's not the top story now because so much has happened. So you may be better by doing Google Bob Smietana and Dave Ramsey and read our story. But in that story, there is a recording of a staff meeting that Mr. Ramsey actually edited and made a blog post called "Got Your Six," and that "Got Your Six" term is a military term referred to someone who's got your back, in which he begins by talking about a former employee who spread a rumor about an affair and how they tracked that person down, and they talked to their hairdresser who spread the rumor, and they harassed the hairdresser into giving up their name, and then they fired the person for spreading false rumors. And then a long kind of discussion of Bill Hybels, Mark Driscoll, Perry Noble, and a neighbor of his who was actually an arsonist. and how each time he defended those people, even though, and any critic, I'm going to defend you to the hilt. And, and some of those, and Mark Driscoll, he said, never did anything wrong. They should have been fired for. He just ticked off snowflakes and really took a strong stand, like, I'm going to have this kind of almost unquestioning loyalty to people I like, even when I'm wrong. And then he said, well, I was wrong about this, but now I'm going to tell you about our leader here, and I'm right about this person. And I demand just kind of loyalty from you. I'm going to be loyal to you. So it's like this, it's really interesting to look at the kind of techniques they use to engender loyalty and the kind of demand for loyalty and the kind of double standard of, there's this statement, you can't gossip, but he, in his meetings, he talks about former employees all the time and runs them down all the time. It's like runs them down. And then he says, but we love you. And it kind of gets very soft, like, we love you here. But if you disagree with us, you think we're crazy, there's the door. So there's this like mix of we love you, we love you, we love you, but our love is very transactional. You will leave, and I will be unquestionably loyal to anyone who is a powerful leader. And I think it's worth listening to say, okay, this is the way this company runs, and is this the kind of leadership that companies should emulate? Because I think that's the bigger question here. It's that there's both the financial part and the church part, and is this a Christian leader, which he's kind of, is this how a Christian leader, should a Christian leader say, don't let, I probably don't want to swear on your thing, but swear in the middle, kiss my butt is not exactly a Christian leadership principle, which is often said. And I think also, is this the bigger question I have is this the way companies should run? Is this the best work environment, health environment? And I think there is a question, does the work environment which they have there further their mission? Does that really help them do their mission? Is it a healthy culture? Because there's a lot of turnover, and is that an example of the best way to run a work culture? And they make that claim, and a lot of people work there, and they're going to hire a lot more people. And I think COVID has tested them on this. I think the COVID thing is too. Does a company have a right? Does a company have any responsibility in the pandemic to take steps to prevent the spread of it? This company does not, and they'll say you can wear a mask, but they ridicule you to wear a mask. And they make one former employee said that wearing a mask was seen as a sign of faith in the leader. And so I think, if you have an employer who berates those who have any concerns about a pandemic that killed 400,000 people, is that a good Christian leadership example?
Those are great questions, Bob. I think we've about run out of time. We've been going for an hour now. I am, Bob, so appreciative of you taking the time to kind of give us the behind the scenes insight on the story and how it came about. I'm so thankful for all the panelists as well for being a part of this and lending expertise. And I guess Bob mentioned you can Google for the link if you want to read Weekend Plug-in on Friday. We'll certainly have the link there as well, and would love to have you read that, or even subscribe to our Substack newsletter and get to read it early. But we've been going an hour, and I appreciate everybody, and I will hit the end button and just thank you very much.
Thank you.